everybody, it's April Perry and Jonathan Bailor back with another episode of the SANE Show. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm doing great, April. How are you today?
I am great, and I'm really excited to ask you a whole lot of questions, put you on the hot seat, and get all my answers about sanity.
It's hot. That seat is hot. I'm standing up because the seat is so hot.
I actually get really excited to be able to record with you because I just write down all my questions. I actually even have more here in my planner I'm going to pull out. I keep a little page of questions to ask Jonathan. And then I have been receiving lots of questions from other friends and people in the Same Families program. And so here we go. Here's my chance to ask you, and really excited because we were talking a little bit before we recorded. We know the basic principles of SANE. We know it's important to have our non-starchy vegetables, nutrient-dense protein, whole food fats, low fructose fruits. We know we should drink water, we should sleep more, we should move more. Like those are the, did I get most of the basic principles there? Anything
Absolutely.
I left out?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Okay, can you tell I talk about this all the time? And I'm thinking about it all the time because I want to be healthy. And one thing I'll just preface, as we're getting into some of these details of foods and we're just peppering Jonathan with questions about what we're actually buying at the store, what we're eating, what we're making, those kinds of logistic questions. I think what it comes from what I can tell from the people who I talk to and from myself, is that when you're struggling with your health or your weight, when every time you see a photograph of yourself or you look in the mirror or you reflect on the state of your physical body, if you're feeling down about yourself, every time you do that, it wears on you so much. It's, what were you saying, it's like 5 or 6 times an hour that someone who is overweight or isn't feeling good about their body. Is that something like that, Jonathan?
Absolutely, yes.
So when you're feeling that and it's so overwhelming and it's just discouraging you, your mind is constantly looking for solutions. And the reason why I love SANE so much is because I trust it. Like, I've seen it happen and work and continue to work in my family. I feel healthier. I love what I'm able to do because of it. And I feel like whenever I start struggling or falling back into where I was before, I just keep thinking, okay, how can I be saner? How can I make better choices? And so a lot of times it's just these little things, knowing what to do with the food in the grocery store, knowing what to put in my fridge, knowing what to eat, that just helps me breathe better and at least know that if I'm not exactly where I want to be right this minute, that I'm on the right track.
I think that's a really powerful point, April. And another distinction, just building off, because on our last show, we did sort of rapid fire questions as well. We're doing some now, and I wanted to make a distinction that I think will really help people. And that is, I had given an analogy in a previous show about over optimizing and how when you're an Olympic athlete, for example, the only thing that's left are these very fine little tweaks you can make. And a distinction that I realized was, so eating is one of the few things that every human being does. Now, let me, of course, right? But like, so if you think of something that not every human being does, for example, basketball, let's say not every human being plays basketball. This is true, right? And let's say that you had a goal of becoming a better basketball player. Intuitively, and if you didn't even know how to dribble a basketball, you know that sort of worrying about your wrist being positioned this way when you do this kind of a shot in this sort of offense is not something that you would at all be thinking about, because you're saying, look, I got to dribble the basketball first. I know that. The challenge is, and that's how, like, when people become better basketball players, right? They start dribbling basketball, then they move on to this, then they move on, and we understand that. But the problem with food is, since we all do it, it's like, and we're all at different levels, but there's only one mass media that, you know, you have these magazines that are written for these people and these, so it's just, you hear all this stuff and it doesn't factor in where you're at or your unique circumstances. So even just one more analogy, if you're an individual who is completely inactive and you're like significantly overweight, significantly struggling with your health, you know that your goal isn't to figure out the perfect, advanced squat technique so that you can squat the most weight you've ever. No, it's like, how can I walk consistently? How can I do the basic things first? But the problem with food is because everybody does it, and because people are at so different situations and we get information from all different angles, I think it's really hard for us to take that approach that we take in every other area of our lives, which is get the basics down first and then worry about the other things later.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you saying that. And I think what's typically happened in my experience is that you'll either have the general things that are told you by the government, things like, how to set up your plate, and that includes a whole lot of information that isn't necessarily going to lead us to the best health. I'll just say that. So you get that kind of thing, you're training at school, or I'll sign up for different emails from nutrition experts, and it's so over to the little fine refinements that I have no idea even what language they're speaking, because they're talking about, like, seriously, the vocabulary words they're using to describe food and exercise I've never even heard before. So I'm like, they're just speaking a whole other language. I just want to know, what do I feed my family and what do I have my kids eat at a party, right? I mean, just really simple things like that.
That's exactly right. And by way of analogy, I think the vast majority of us are not, if you were to join a mailing list for concert pianists, they would be or like chess masters. This is the mailing list that people who've been playing chess for 15 years. I mean, that's anything that you're an expert in, right? If you're totally. A CPA or a lawyer, or there's a vernacular for expert. Yeah. But the vast majority of us, unless we're professional fitness competitors, we're just trying to be, like you've always said, we're just trying to be healthy and happy and whole and achieve nutritional serenity. So that's why, like, some of that stuff, it's not that it's bad or wrong. It's just that if your goal is to be a concert pianist, that's one thing. If your goal is to be able to play chopsticks presentably, that's a totally different thing.
I've got the chopsticks down. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is just give you some of the questions that have been coming. And I think really what this is just going to enable us to do is to reinforce the basic principles of SANE, but help kind of bring us back to center. That's what I hire you to do, Jonathan, is help bring me back to center. All the stuff in the media, all these questions, I just say, hey, we call you JB around our house. Hey, JB, what do we do about this? So here's one question, for example. All right, I actually received a picture. A friend of mine sent me a picture. This was actually submitted by Andrea. And it was in this month's issue of Martha Stewart Living. And it says, oh, do you want to get more protein in your smoothies without using protein powder? You just add chia seeds, peanut butter, let me look and see what the other things is, sliced almonds or whole hemp seeds. And it says you'll have anywhere from 3.5 to 5 grams of protein per serving now. You've just added protein to your smoothie without protein powder. So the question comes in, what does Jonathan think about this as a substitution for protein powder?
All right, so this is not going to be a rapid fire one. I don't want it to be a rapid fire one because this is such a. I mean, we're going to keep recording these shows for a long time.
This is in the magazines, right? You just open the magazine and tell you don't need protein powder.
And it's so common. This kind of like it adds. So let me just make one thing really, really, really clear, right? And vegetarians and vegans will be the first people to tell you what I'm about to say and agree with it. Okay. Protein is in everything.
Okay.
There is protein.
It's in a bagel.
Absolutely. A Snickers bar has protein in it.
Yeah.
Okay. So by definition, if you have a bowl of cereal and you put a Snickers bar in it, you're going to add protein. Okay.
Okay, but like chia seeds and almonds, and these are Snickers bars, right? So you see it and you think, oh, that's healthy.
No, absolutely. But so why are they not Snickers bars? Okay, so the reason we think the Snickers bar analogy is ridiculous is because we're like, well, Jonathan, there's so much else in a Snickers bar that isn't protein.
Right.
So it's not a good source. It's not a concentrated source of protein. Okay. Chia seeds are freaking amazing. I eat chia seeds literally every single day, probably multiple times a day. However, if I'm trying to get protein, chia seeds are not, that's just, there's about as much protein in chia seeds as there is protein in a Snickers bar. I mean, not truly, but it's not that far off. It doesn't mean chia seeds are bad for you. It just means chia seeds are great for you. They're just not a concentrated source of protein. So
okay,
that's the key distinction. So beans, again, beans have protein in them. So does a pickle. But you wouldn't put a pickle in a workout shake to add the protein because it's mostly not protein. So yes, the only reason protein powder is so useful is because good protein powders are usually, they're like 80% protein. So that it's just pure unadulterated protein. So by way of calorie speak, if you wanted to add 30 grams of protein to a smoothie so that you could get a bunch of metabolic benefit that comes from eating that dosage of protein.
Yeah.
If you were to try to do that with chia seeds, you would have to probably put 1,000 calories worth of chia seeds into your smoothie, which is probably too many calories of chia seeds to eat in a day.
Okay.
Versus 1 scoop of protein powder.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. Good question, Andrea. So another question building on the protein. I was reading in the SANE startup ebook about how clams are an optimal source of protein, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so I went and bought canned clams, and I'm gagging at the store as I'm buying them. I'm like, Jonathan says, do you eat canned clams? So I'm at the store. But a can of clams only had like 10 grams of protein in the can. So to trigger muscle protein synthesis, do I need to eat 3 cans of clams at one meal? Because that's a whole lot of clams.
That's the first time I've ever heard the sentence in my life. That's a whole lot of clams.
A lot of clams. I'm eating all these clams. I'm like, Jonathan.
I mean, there's never been a moment where I've been walking down the street and someone's just been like, Jonathan, look over there. That's a whole lot of clams. No, so maybe if I lived on a beach. But
yes. Okay.
So yeah, the reason there is, so what you'll notice 2 interesting things, and this applies to seafood pretty generally. So seafood and most food in general is actually mostly water. I know that sounds a little silly and or obvious, but if you look at a can of clams and if you look at how much it weighs, let's say it weighs 100 grams, just for easy math. And then it says that I have 10 grams of protein. You're like, well, what the heck are the other 90 grams? Because there's no fat and there's no carbohydrate. Okay. The other 90 grams of weight is water. So clams are mostly water. And like vegetables, for example, you put vegetables in your blender, you blend them, they're mostly water. That's why when you dehydrate something, it becomes so small because you take all the water out. Right. And that's also why, for example, oil is such a concentrated source of calories. It doesn't have any water in it. So it's just pure, unadulterated energy. Anyway, so clams, yes, to answer your question, and that also has to do with why clams and protein in general is so highly satisfying. The volume of whole food protein that you need to consume to optimize your health is a high volume of food. I don't say eat more as a marketing gimmick, although it is very effective at getting people's attention. I say eat more because it's true, because to eat an optimal amount of vegetables and protein, you're literally going to be consuming 2 to 4 pounds of food per day. Okay.
So yes, I should eat 3 cans of clams, or should I have like 1 can of clams and then some other protein? What would you do?
No, I would. I mean, you can get that 30 grams. So again, it also varies by body type, right? So we say 30 grams, that's going to be not 30 grams. I mean, 30 grams is an estimation. So if you're a 250 pound, 6'5" NFL linebacker, it's probably more towards 40 or 50. If you're a 6-year-old child, it's probably more towards 20. So it depends, again, on where you're at on that spectrum of size. But should you eat, I would say you would eat at least 2 cans of clams, or you could supplement your clams with some other source of protein. Maybe you've got some other seafood you want to throw in there, or maybe you have some Greek yogurt. But yeah, and eating a lot of healthy food is great, because maybe after eating 3 clams, you're not going to have any room for some other insane nonsense.
Yeah, that's a lot of clams. Okay, no, that was helpful, because I just think, well, this is optimal. Man, I have to eat a lot of it. And so, but I guess the cans aren't that big. So, okay, that's really helpful. So then we have some questions about how SANE is different than Paleo. And I know you've talked about this in some other podcasts, but that's the most common question that I keep getting. Do you kind of have a 1-sentence way of explaining how you differentiate the 2?
Yes. Well, there's 2 sentences. First is, we should get really clear on what we mean when we say paleo, because there's actually like 17 different versions of paleo. There's primal, there's books that say, so Paleo in its original sense, like its academic sense, was eat things that are found directly in nature. So by that definition, there are huge differences between sane eating and paleo. For example, honey is found directly in nature. However, honey is completely insane because the goal of paleo in the truest sense is just to say, eat what our ancestors ate. That's the goal of paleo. It's actually orthogonal to, its goal isn't, and this isn't a criticism. Its goal isn't lose fat. Its goal isn't manage diabetes. Its goal isn't improve athletic performance. Its goal is eat like our ancestors ate. Just like, for example, Atkins' goal is eat so you achieve ketosis. The goal of sane eating is to eat so that you maximize the satiety, minimize the aggression, maximize the nutrition, and minimize the efficiency, or maximize, again, the sanity, water, fiber, and protein content of your diet. So the biggest difference between paleo and sane, paleo is a totally different goal. Paleo is saying eat like your ancestors ate, and your ancestors ate honey. Your ancestors ate sweet potatoes. Your ancestors ate potatoes. Your ancestors ate rice. So there's a bunch of different things. Your ancestors didn't eat 12 servings of vegetables per day. Definitely didn't eat 12. They didn't eat green leafy vegetables year round. Green leafy vegetables weren't available year round. They weren't available at all in certain parts of the world. So the biggest difference, I would say, between sane and paleo is the fundamental principles of sane, which is eat non-starchy vegetables first, nutrient-dense proteins second, and whole food fats third, are completely different from the core principles of paleo, which is eat like your ancestors ate.
Is there anything in a sane diet that wouldn't fit into a paleo diet? Absolutely.
Protein powder. Protein bars, anything that you can't find directly in nature. So nut butters technically aren't found direct. I mean, again, that's what's the definition of paleo? It becomes very difficult. Nut butter isn't found directly in nature, and our ancestors didn't eat almond butter. But if you search "is almond butter paleo" on the internet, you'll see the answer is yes. But it's not found directly. You know, corn is found directly in nature. Corn is found directly in nature. Soy beans are found, tobacco is found directly in nature. So, I mean, those are some of the differences.
Okay, so that's helpful. All right, so can we talk about soy for a second? Because there are some people who are saying, oh, I'm excited to be sane. Here's all the tofu that I'm starting to eat. But I don't see tofu really ever mentioned by you. So what's your recommendation on that?
Tofu is generally not super sane. Soy as a whole is a very industrialized crop. So it's like wheat or it's like corn, in the sense that we have to be very careful of where it's coming from in the sort of monocrop type culture that we have. Soy is also not high in protein. It's generally considered a good source of protein, like beans or nuts are considered good sources of protein, but most soy and tofu products are actually mostly fat. That's not a bad thing. The other thing just to keep in mind when it comes to soy and tofu is very few people, if anyone, just eat tofu or soy because it's disgusting by itself, just like raw, like you have to put it with other things. You have to marinate it. You have to do things with it. So if soy is the only thing that you have available to you, I mean, we don't have an obesity epidemic because people are eating too much soy, but if you are able to eat other things than soy is just lower on the sane spectrum than other options.
Okay, but if someone, let's say they're vegetarian and they choose soy, that's just an option, what they're choosing to do.
Yeah, and I would just highly recommend that they try to stick to soy as close to its natural form as possible. There's an interesting tension between the common sense of highly processed manufactured food isn't a good idea, and being cruel to animals isn't a good idea. Like, those both make total sense, but tofurkey is, you're being kind to turkeys. You're not killing them, but it's taking, I mean, that's, what the heck is I mean, it's this chemically engineered nonsense. So if you're going to eat tofu, eat like the simplest, purest, cleanest tofu you can find, not these like meatless nonsense sausage patties, which have all these chemicals and toxic garbage in them.
Okay, yes, we had chicken that had an apostrophe where the E was supposed to go. And Eric thought it was regular chicken. He wasn't looking and just bought a bunch of it until we got home and realized what it was. Not so tasty. Okay, question about stevia. When you're talking about things like not processing, I've been seeing this something going around online talking about how you think you're buying stevia, but you're really not. You're buying something that's totally processed or mixed with other chemicals. So, and this is where I start feeling like, oh man, here I think I'm doing something good. And then wait, maybe I have it totally wrong, So what do you recommend as far as sources for stevia or xylitol, safe sweeteners? How do you know they're really safe?
Just read the nutrition facts. That's the easiest way.
So what should it say? Because I can't find one that's really, where do you find that? Just
the internet and the SANE store.
Okay, the SANE store. Because everything, I went to a health food store. I went to my local grocery store. I was looking all around, and everything that says it's stevia, when you look, there's something else that's on it. So are there any?
It's usually always a blend, because stevia, and there's another thing called Lohan-Go, which is somewhat similar. They're very difficult to cook with because they're not at all like sugar. It's a little bit, so like the reason Splenda is so popular as an artificial sweetener is because you can use it pound for pound like you would sugar. And it behaves like sugar when you bake with it. But stevia is more analogous to cinnamon. It's an herb. So, it's a totally different thing. If you want to use stevia to sweeten things, it's going to take some experimentation, and you're going to want to look for pure stevia, which is something you're going to want to find on the internet, not only because it's going to be purer, but you're also going to save a lot of money versus buying it at your grocery store.
Okay, that sounds good. And is stevia better than xylitol?
It's not really a question of better or worse. I would say it's different. The xylitol is a sugar alcohol, and there's been a huge amount of research done on it. Xylitol, for example, has great antibacterial benefits. It's actually been shown to be helpful with things like ear infections, believe it or not. It bakes really well. It's just a totally different sweet. It's a little bit like saying what's better, honey or table sugar. I mean, it depends on what we're using them for. So what's better for baking? Unequivocally, xylitol bakes way better than stevia. From a sanity, metabolic healing perspective, I would recommend erythritol over xylitol, and I would recommend stevia or Lohan-Go above both of those. But stevia and Lohan-Go are so hard to use because they're so unlike sugar that, again, you got to do that trade-off of, are you going for ease of use and I can actually do it, or it's perfect? And I think that's the tension or decision we have to make.
Okay. All right. Like that. Another question we talked about potatoes and rice and things like that as being something our ancestors ate. Questions about things like sweet potatoes, turnips, parsnips, butternut squash. Sometimes it's hard to know, what are these? They're not non-starchy vegetables, or are they? What would you suggest?
The general rule of thumb for whether or not something's a non-starchy vegetable, and this isn't always true, but it's true 90+% of the time, is can you eat it raw? So you can't eat peanuts raw. You can't, not that that's a vegetable, but you can't eat sweet potatoes raw. You can't eat sweet
turnips raw.
Oh, well, most people. Okay, so again, I said 90% of the time.
Okay.
But for example, potatoes, sweet potatoes, they're generally things that are not eaten raw. Corn is not eaten raw. It's a starch. The key thing to keep in mind is when it comes to butternut squash, when it comes to parsnips, when it comes to turnips, these are, again, it's what are you eating them in place of? If you're eating them in place of green leafy vegetables, that's not the right trade-off to make. If you're eating them in place of any form of starchy grain, it's a great trade-off to make. If you're eating them in place of any form of sugar or sweetener, it's a great trade-off to make. So it's what are you eating this instead of? I think that's the key question versus just objectively, where does this stand? Okay.
So the new thing, though, at most restaurants is they offer sweet potato fries as this healthier option. I don't know what kind of oil they were cooking them in. I have no idea, but they look healthier than the regular fries. What do you say about those?
Sweet potato fries are healthier than conventional potato fries because sweet potatoes have... Absolutely not. No, they're fried. Just to be, a filtered cigarette is better for you than an unfiltered cigarette, but that doesn't mean it's good for you, right? So the fried sweet potato is better for you than a fried potato, but a fried anything is not good for you because heating oil to that temperature is terrible. And then sweet potatoes are something which it depends on your goals. We could talk about that in a separate podcast about when you should and shouldn't eat sweet potatoes, but yeah, they're better for you than regular French fries. That doesn't mean they're good for you. And that's a big myth that even professional nutritionists make. Something being better for you does not make it good for you. Smoking 1 cigarette per day versus 2 is better. That doesn't mean it's good for you.
Okay. All right. Well, I feel like you've given me a lot of really good information. What would you suggest as a next action for me or for the people who are asking all these questions? Because I know you're kind of laughing. I kind of see you laughing over there that we have all these random questions, and I think eventually it'll just become common sense for us. But what's the next action when you have these questions or you're not quite sure if I should be eating 3 cans of clams or that type of thing? What do you suggest?
No, I'm definitely not laughing because it's not that I think the questions are bad or wrong. It's the 3 cans of clams just just made me laugh in general. So the questions are fine to have. The thing that I want to make sure we give ourselves permission to do is to always seek out improvement rather than perfection, and to be okay with ambiguity, because it's always going to be ambiguous. It's ambiguous for me, right? And as long as you're moving in the right direction, right? Like we said, sweet potato fries are better for you than regular fries, but we know frying stuff, it's probably not a good idea. Like at some level, we know that, right? So, it's never going to be perfect. As long as we're making steps in the right direction, I think that's great. And I think we need to celebrate. So for example, if you're asking a question like, should I be eating 1 can of clams or 3? Should I be using stevia or xylitol? This form of stevia, is it as good as this other form of stevia? Like the fact that you're even asking those questions means you are on the right path. So it's a good thing. Just please give yourself permission not to let what you don't know prevent you from acting on what you do know. And I think that's the key stretch goal takeaway. Don't let what you don't know yet stop you from making awesome progress on what you do know, which is rock your vegetables, rock your protein, rock your whole food fats, and sleep. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, I feel like it's a great recipe for life in general. Wouldn't you say? It's going to apply in a whole lot of other circumstances, whether it's financial, whether it's spiritual, whether it's relational, that they're moving forward on what you know and then continuing to learn. I mean, that's what we do at Learn, Do, Become. It's all about that growth and that progress. So thank you so much, Jonathan. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. And I personally feel so grateful that we could just come give Jonathan these rapid fire questions and just get better directions that we can totally be sane. So have a wonderful day and remember to stay sane.